Poke the Bear is brought to you by the Game Time app.
And welcome into Poke the Bear, presented by Prize Picks. Go use that promo code CLNS to get up to $100 back on that first deposit. And we're presented by Game Time. Go use that promo code CLNS to get $20 off that first purchase. Terms apply. I'm Evan Marinofsky. That is Conor Ryan. Conor, what is up?
Evan, I'm doing well. How you doing?
Doing great. This is another one of those somewhat pre-recorded episodes where we're talking today about the best Bruins draft picks of the Don Sweeney era. So this is going back to 2015. I'm sure this will bring up a lot of fun memories for Bruins fans near and far. And as we said on the episode of best free agent signings, do not fret. We will have a worst free agent signings and draft picks episode. Don't you worry. So we will have that covered. We're not all positive. We'll do a little positive, but then we gotta get on the devil's side. A little negativity never hurt anybody. But today it's positive stuff. Positive stuff. Best Bruins draft picks since 2015. I know a lot of people will, say, "Oh, there must be none." And I gotta say, when I was going through Conor, parsing through the draft since 2015, shout out to Hockey DB. There are actually a good number of solid picks. I hate to say it. There are a good number of picks. It's hard to consider the 24 and 23 drafts because they were just so recent. It takes a long time for players to develop. It takes a while, is my point. You're just sort of seeing the fruits of Fabian Lysell potentially, and that was 2021. So I think we're... Did you have any other thoughts from that free agent episode? Did we miss anybody? I don't think we did.
I feel like we covered all of our bases, right, in terms of the good, and I know we're going to get into the bad as well for another episode. So I would like to say for anyone who's like, where the hell is the negativity? Don't worry. We'll have it. We'll have drafts. We'll have. I am sure people can imagine who the draft picks are going to be, but we'll have that. We'll have worst free agent signing as well, but. Let's focus on the positives right now. It's middle of July, whenever this episode actually does drop. Let's focus on some positives here. Because as you said, there actually are a few guys that have, I think, lived up or exceeded the billing in terms of what the Bruins have had. And as you said, there's, it doesn't make much sense hopping on, the 2023-24 drafts. But even, some of these previous ones, too, where, they haven't had first or second round picks. Are you weighing as much on, a guy, a third round guy or a fourth round guy who is solid in what they are, maybe an everyday AHLer or a guy like Lauko, something like that. There's a lot of these kind of guys, third, fourth, fifth round picks. It's how you kind of weigh those expectations as to what exactly you were, what you mapped them out to be at the NHL level. So it's not a huge pool of selections here, I would say.
No, it's not. I think I sent you a Google Doc. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So I would say about 13 guys since 2015 in those drafts that I would, classify as wins, as guys you would draft in this sense, where we will do the same format we did in the last episode. I think it was on Bruins Beat of best free agent signings. We'll do a draft. We'll each pick 3. And instead of giving one of us the first pick, I have a coin right here. I have these 4 quarters next to my computer. I don't know. What state is this? I used to be into this. I don't even know. Oh, Vermont. I think this is Vermont. That's interesting.
Big Ben 2020 guy.
Yeah,
Nice.
I think that's a chunky monkey on the quarter, the ice cream flavor. So, or maybe it's chocolate fudge brownie at Ben and Jerry's is just freaking so good. So maybe it's that. It's chocolate fudge brownie on the quarter.
There you go.
That's so funny. Well, anyways, Conor, why don't you pick heads or tails? And if you win it, you get the first pick. So what do you pick?
Going tails.
Tails never fails. All right, let's see. Everyone can see it. And it's tails. You get the first pick, my friend. You got it. It's right here. People can't really see it on YouTube, but that's tails. So who would you? Yeah, we do have proof. This is a real thing. Who would you like to select with your first pick?
I mean, there's a lot of appealing options, but I'm going to go with a guy that is a key piece of this team now and for the future, and was also not a first-round pick by any means. I'm going to go with Jeremy Swayman, 2017 round 4, pick 111. A guy that, again, sometimes it is pretty much, as you just saw there, a coin flip when it comes to drafting goalies and what you're expecting out of them. But I think Swayman's one of those rare occasions where he makes the jump up to Maine, and right away you're like, Bruins might have something in this guy. He was fantastic throughout his time with the Black Bears. Didn't spend a whole lot of time in Providence, and it's just been on an upward trajectory since then. And it is kind of a crapshoot when it comes to, it's kind of like quarterbacks drafting goalies. Like, you kind of don't really know what to expect. You can look at how they performed against lower level competition, but sometimes it's all about, looking at their mechanics, their ceiling, all these things, what you can get out of them. And I think for a 4th round pick to have a guy in Swayman who looks the part in terms of a franchise goalie was fantastic this past year, and should, still got to work on that contract, but barring anything catastrophic, will be here for the long haul. I think for a 4th round pick to find your franchise goalie and to go from Tim Thomas to Tuukka Rask to the Linus Ullmark to now Swayman. Pretty good pipeline you've had there, especially with a 4th round pick being the guy that should carry you for ideally the next 10 plus years.
I mean, that is as good as you're going to get with a 4th. Like, you dream of luck like that, and to have that, I mean, that was a hell of a pick. And it's interesting because, like, I remember him at Maine when they would play UMass, and he would get, Swayman would average like 45 shots against per game because those were the Maine teams that were not very good. And one of the interesting things was, like, the UMass student section would be right behind Swayman, and they'd be taunting him, they'd be going at him, and he'd be cheering with him. Like, he would be, putting water in the crowd. Like, he would have fun with him. And I remember seeing that and being like, it's interesting. That's very interesting. I mean, that's a lot of pro potential right there. It's not saying that's everything, but, like, his demeanor, how calm he was something you wanted. And that could not have turned out any better. Now, again, we'll see. Maybe a team offer sheets him in the next week and he's gone. But hey, that still does not. It still means he's the first pick. I still think he's first pick material for this. For my pick, it's a first rounder, but it's a first rounder when you look back, you go, how did he slide to where he got picked? And that was Charlie McAvoy in 2016, 14th pick. Again, like you mentioned with goaltenders, this franchise having franchise goalies, needing franchise goalies. The Bruins have prided themselves on having a legit number 1 defenseman for a long time. Or Bork, Chara, McAvoy, and there were others in between there. But again, I'm not going into every single player. But again, just what he brings, the two-way abilities he has. It's interesting because around that same time, I feel like smaller puck-moving defensemen were things that teams wanted. You saw a guy like Grzelcyk. The Bruins had Krug. But this two-way force that McAvoy really was is now what the league wants. Your Victor Hedmans, your Roman Yossi's, your Mikhail Makar's a speedster and very offensive, but finding his own zone and like D like that. That's what McAvoy is. You put Heiskanen kind of in that category too. So the perfect kind of number 1 defenseman. I saw Jay Fresh did like a poll of the top defensemen in the NHL. By the way, all 4, and this was done on July 11th. So when this comes out, you have to scroll a little further back. But if you do, I think the Bruins are the only team to have all 4 of their D in the top 64 defensemen in the NHL. Yeah. Like, other teams might have had 3, but I think they were the only team with 4. McAvoy was number 6. So again, like, I remember Fluto wrote a couple years ago, like, McAvoy might never win a Norris just given the talent, that's in the league around him. It doesn't mean he's never going to be a number 1 top 5 defenseman in the NHL. And I think he's there. So, and you covered him at BU, right?
Yeah. And like,
what was that like?
I mean, you can kind of see why I think probably at the time people were like, this guy is like a 10th overall to 15th overall. Cause I feel like he was a guy you mapped out as kind of being the jack of all trades, master of none in terms of he can do a little bit of everything, but that just maybe makes him just a really solid, good player. Like, again, top 4 potential, obviously can, play 20 minutes a night, but wasn't this, maybe super dynamic player, like obviously different kind of player, but wasn't like a Makar where it's like you saw him in college being like, this guy's got something, and I think you look at just the way that he's developed McAvoy and he's become that guy where he kind of can do a little bit of everything, but he excels at so many different areas with it, right? Like there's a lot of guys that can move the puck that are great offensively, like the Yossi's and the Hugheses and the Makars and those kinds of players. But there's a few guys that can consistently, play 23, 24 minutes a night, give you 50-ish points per season, can chip in on the power play, can chip in on the PK when needed, hit like a freight train when he squares guys up, right? And can do kind of all those things. Like that's what makes him such a special player. And it's not that he's kind of a jack of all trades, like master of none. Like he excels in some of those areas. There's a few guys that I think open ice, even Zadorov, who is pretty good at blowing people up, has mentioned that in terms of open ice hits, McAvoy is one of the best at it. There's very few guys that can have that reputation while also being a really good puck mover, can handle that, can be a durable player, contribute offensively. So I think it was one of those things where there was questions over where he would really thrive or what areas of the game he would do well in. And I think he's kind of proven it, that he's one of those few guys that can do just a little bit of everything at a high level, the NHL level.
Yeah, he can. And it must have been fascinating to cover him during that time and then be like, oh my God, the Bruins took him. Bruins freaking took him. You covered his first year?
So I was,
right?
I did cover, but I was technically a graduate at that point. I was the college freshman who hangs around the high school, acting cool even though I was a year older. So I was
Pete Alonso with the home run derby.
Yes, exactly. So I was still covering BU for a few different websites at that point. But my senior year was like the Eichel Grizzly.
That's right.
Grizzly, you saw him in college, and there was the question there was a lot of other guys of that profile who were like 5'10" puck moving defensemen who were like, all right, NHL level, we'll see how they do. But in college, he was dynamic. And again, credit to Grizzly for being a guy that's carved out a 8-year career so far off of just when there is usually a lot of skepticism about how those kind of skilled 5'10" college defensemen can really kind of struggle at the next level. And he had a pretty nice career with the Bruins.
One of my favorite things is like I'll be watching kids in prep or who are U18, U17, and they're undersized defensemen who are super dynamic, and a college will say like, yeah, I just don't know how he's going to project to the NHL level, and I'm like, well, you don't have to worry about that. Like,
yes,
you
exactly.
just have to. You need a good college defenseman. This is a good college defenseman. Like that's all that matters for you. I want to get to my second pick. So with my second pick, I'm going to go to the 2015 draft, that infamous 2015 draft, and I'm going to go not the first round, second round, pick 37, Brandon Carlo. You look back at that 15 draft, and there's a lot of regret from that first round. Now they have no more 2015 first rounders on the roster with Jake DeBrusk going to Vancouver. But Carlo help salvage this draft. I mean, DeBrusk did as well. Maybe one of us will pick DeBrusk later on. But what you've gotten out of Carlo is a very stable top 4 shutdown right shot defenseman. And sort of like how I mentioned McAvoy, his play style has been with the trends of the NHL and kind of with the style. Carlo is a big, mobile, shutdown guy is another trend where it's like you need big guys back there. He's that. Now, is he the open ice hitter that McAvoy is? No. Is he as physical? Not really. But his stick is great. He's so cerebral, such a smart defender. You have him on cheap money. That 2019 playoff run was peak Brandon Carlo, real like glimpse at, okay, this guy can freaking play, and he's going to be in your top 4 for hopefully 5 to 10 years. So getting that kind of value in the second round is great. I know there's been like 2015 redrafts. I'd have to go back and see like who else was picked. But like looking back, he's probably like a late first rounder. Like that, like if you were to redraft the whole thing, what he gives you is probably like mid to late first round. So you can make the case you got 2 first round talents in that draft, which, not exactly enough to hang your hat on given what you had. You look back at that 15 draft though, and they had 1 million picks. And I'm sure we'll talk about this at the end because I don't want to spoil anybody. But like, they did get a few NHL caliber players in that draft. It just wasn't where they wanted it to be, and the caliber of NHL talent that they needed. But yeah, I'd go with Carlo for number 2.
Yeah, no, solid pick there in terms of just a guy that brings you stability, right? As you said, he's not a guy that's going to light people up. He's maybe not dynamic, but he's like a great right guard. He's like a Joe Tooney.
Yes.
You don't really know. Maybe you don't notice him that much, but if you don't, it means he's doing his job and just secures everything in terms of when he's playing at a high level. And I think, he dealt with some injuries early on, but I do feel like the detractors for Carlo have quieted down the last couple of years, where I think he's really started to, again, he's been healthy, but he started to string together stronger seasons just as a whole. And he's just been steady. And I think that's what you want out of your stay at home top 4 fixture. And you look at just what he provides. Yeah. You say late first, but look at a guy like Tyler Myers, who was a 6'8", kind of the same profile. He was 11th overall, I think.
That's
what
right.
Brendan Carlo gives you, consistent, great work on the PK. The Bruins have had one of the best PK units for years now, with Carlo as one of their main guys. For what he provides, he's probably should be a top 15 pick in a draft. Maybe not. 2015 was stacked, but in terms of most years, if you told someone hey, we'll give you this guy who can play 10 years for you, when healthy, plays 20 minutes a night, anchors your PK, don't have to worry about him. You don't just plot him in the top 4 and you're good to go. I think that's kind of the best case scenario for what you want out of a guy that's in the first round. So for them to find him, I think 37th overall, pretty good.
Yeah, teams are taking him every time in that situation. Who's your second pick?
I'll go. I think at this point, as you said, there's a few guys that are still pretty young that I think this ranking or where we pick guys is going to be projecting a little bit. But I look at the fact that I don't think anyone had him on a lot of draft boards at all. Mason Lohrei, 2020, second round, 58th overall. Again, gets drafted. Every expert on Twitter is oh, I got to make a graphic. They did a little Microsoft Paint. There's a little smiley face. This is Mason Lohrei. For the Bruins to identify a guy like that was, especially at the time, was viewed as such a project, right? It was only, 2 years out of switching to forward, was super rangy. You didn't really know. You could see the potential of looking at a guy 6'5", offensive defenseman, all right, maybe he's John Carlson or someone like that, but I don't know, whatever. To bank on that with a second round pick when not a lot of people had them on their draft boards. And so far, again, he's got a long way to go. But from what you saw last year, a lot to like about a player that just seems every time he's received more reps, he's gotten better. He hasn't hit a wall. You look at where he was in October, where he was well ahead of schedule, and you look at where he was in the playoffs against the Panthers, where you told me in October, Mason Lohrei is going to get top 4 minutes against the Florida Panthers in their forecheck. You'd be like, shit, it's not great. But every time, I think throughout this year, he kept on getting better and better. So just the fact that he was such maybe a reach in terms of when the Bruins selected him, but they banked on that, potential. They banked on how unique of a prospect he is. And again, he's a guy that, same as kind of what we talked about with Dean Letourneau a few weeks ago. That's a guy that if he thrives and hits his level, a 6'5" playmaking defenseman who can play 20 minutes a night, every team would be lining up to have one of those guys. And you were able to find this guy kind of well off the board, and so far it looks like it's a home run.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think just for a second round pick, and you look at those drafts, right? 2020, 2021. I know they had a first in 2021, but lower first and a lower first in 2019. And I think the fact that you have a pick like that who is clearly a first round talent and is just a late bloomer completely, is a steal. It's a steal. And you take that every time. And I think what he can bring you, I mean, if he ends up being a top 4 stalwart who is putting up, 50 points every season, it's going to be holy crap. And I think, maybe there's room for more. So again, I don't want to get too crazy. I mean, in that best Bruins free agency picks, I had Elias Lindholm bringing them a Stanley Cup in the next couple of years. So, I mean, I'm not going to get too far ahead of myself. If you want to go to those Stanley Cup games or any big games coming up, why don't you go check out our good friends over at Game Time? It's the summer, which means nothing beats a ball game. The crack of the bat, the roar of the crowd, and the nice weather. It's both relaxing and exciting. The perfect combination. Life is good. Have those experiences with Game Time. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. The Red Sox are actually good, which makes it even more fun to be at Fenway this summer But maybe you're planning a trip around going to an opposing ballpark, which is actually one of my bucket list items, hitting every MLB ballpark in the country. Thankfully, I have Game Time to help that happen. Some of the things I love about Game Time are last minute deals. Save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater. There's flash deals, save even more, with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. And I like the zone deals. Save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. So take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So you're up next. What would be your third pick in our draft?
I'm going to go once again with maybe a bit of a looking ahead progression, but Matt Poitras, 2022, second round, 54th overall. Again, need to see how he does over a full year being healthy, but a guy that, much like Lohrei, and again, like I think Poitras was probably a safer selection in that he was going to be a second round pick, had a lot of promise that he showcased with the Storm in the OHL, but still was a guy that I think has just accelerated his development timeline. This is a guy that, was kind of like a Jack Studnicka, where it's like, all right, really gifted, attacks downhill, really assertive with the puck. But we'll see how he does at the next level. He can line up the OHL, but we'll see what's next. And for him to go right from the OHL, have a great preseason, showcase his value there. And again, like you look at last year, and he, I think, one, hit a wall, but also was banged up, was probably, in over his head in terms of the physicality and the schedule and all those things. But he was on pace for like the first month and a half of being like a 50-point guy. He had like, I think it was 13 points in his first 27 games, something like that. Like he was a guy that was showcasing his value. So not to say that I think all of a sudden this year he's going to be healthy and he's going to be a 55-point guy. That'd be fantastic. But this is a guy that you look at just the fact that he only just recently turned 20. It still has, gone through the first hurdles and the first growing pains that usually that's reserved for guys who are 22, 23. He's just a guy that you look at how desperate the Bruins are down the middle and how much they need a young, cost-controlled player there. To find this guy who I think has just exceeded expectations everywhere he's gone so far. For a second-round pick, I think that's great value for what he already is and ideally what he should be in another couple of years.
And you think about when they picked him, right? 2022. So this was the first season without Krejci. And, you knew Bergeron's career was coming to an end sometime soon. Now, they obviously got Krejci that next year, but you knew that they needed franchise centerman. They needed a franchise centerman at some point. Now, is he a projected bona fide number one center in the NHL? Not quite yet, but definitely top six, and someone who at some point in his career is probably going to be a consistent, 55 to 70 point guy, which is not far off point wise from what Krejci and Bergeron were. So right. Not trying to compare him here, but like point production wise, it's not crazy. So I think getting that value at pick 54 is incredible. So yeah, I would agree with you. That would have been my pick, but you went in and snatched. I tried to trade up for that pick, but you were stubborn. You were like, I'm not giving away that pick. Not going to happen.
Sorry, Evan.
With my final pick, I could go with a lower in the lineup guy. I could go with maybe a third pairing defenseman, but I think there's an obvious final pick here. 2015 draft again, pick 14, Jake DeBrusk. Like, again, I know everybody, that draft gets crushed, rightfully so. We'll get to that in a different episode. But, I mean, DeBrusk was a legit first-round pick. Like, gave you a ton of production. Big in the playoffs. Fit in your top six. Worked alongside David Krejci. Obviously, there were, attitude concerns, stuff with Bruce Cassidy over his 9 years here. But for a first-round pick, like, that's what you need. Like that, I mean, again, it was never, there was a season in there where I think he had almost 30 goals, but cut short due to injury. Had some big moments, had the Winter Classic game against Pittsburgh. I was a fine first rounder. Like no one, people ragged on DeBrusk for certain things, but it was never like, oh, they shouldn't have picked DeBrusk with that first pick. It was, Senyshyn and Zaboral that, those were the picks that got crushed. DeBrusk turned into a very good offensive NHL player, and the fact that he was able to also learn the D zone well and kill penalties and be reliable there. So like, again, I think both of us were on the same page of like, if it was the right price, bring him back. Obviously the Bruins really did not want him back considering he signed for $5.5 million out in Vancouver. But I'd go with DeBrusk as my final pick. Jake DeBrusk.
Yeah, no, solid top 6 player. And as you said, give him credit. Like his kind of game was based on his speed and his scoring ability. And you were kind of waiting for him to finally hit that 30-goal threshold. That didn't happen here, but full credit to just how he developed over time, where he became a really good two-way player. And again, a guy that you look at, what's the easiest way to, I think, tick off Bruins fans is not delivering in big moments. The guy had a lot of clutch playoff goals. You look at the 2018 Game 7 against the Maple Leafs, was arguably their most consistent offensive player in this most recent playoff run. A guy that elevated his game at the right time. And I think was a great Bruin for what he provided. So, as you said, I think it's the rest of the draft. Like, again, it's not even saying like they need to get, the Barzal, those guys. Even like another Konechny would have helped. But like the same thing in terms of what DeBrusk provided this team over the years. Again, it's just that stability. It's why we're now looking at like, again, it's intriguing this upcoming year of like, is it Lysell? Is it Geeky? Is it Brazeau? Like, that's intriguing, but the stability that DeBrusk offered you, not just, the scoring, but especially just his two-way game and how he could impact the game while moving his feet, was a good Bruin and well worth that first-round pick.
It was. So, yeah, that's about it for that. Anybody else? Like, I think with my next pick, I would have probably went with Trent Frederick. Just what he can give you. Again, that's just an end of the first rounder. I know everybody brings up who was the guy drafted right after him? DeBrincat, right? DeBrincat was the guy picked right after him. So obviously, yeah, like hindsight, of course, but you picked Frederick and turned into a serviceable bottom 6 guy. Like, has some goal scoring upside. Maybe. Yeah, like I like that's fine. Would you rather DeBrincat? Of course. Yeah, that would have been nice, but they didn't. They got Frederick instead. Looking at the rest here, like Lozon, obviously, big hitter.
Can I say my honorable mention?
I know where you're gonna go with this.
Oh yeah, who am I gonna go with?
I'm not gonna take it from you, but I think you're gonna go with.
I'm gonna go with.
You're gonna
go. Who?
I was saying a defenseman. You're gonna go with a defenseman from the second round in 2016. That's what you're gonna go.
I sure am. Ryan Lindgren, baby. Yes,
I knew it.
A guy that every time I think you watch him play with the Rangers, you're like, damn, he'd be a really good Bruin. He hits like a freight train. He's always bleeding. That guy could like go to a trampoline park and leave just covered in blood. Like every time I see that guy, he's getting stitched up. He's getting something to stop the bleeding on the bench. Super physical player. Again, was part of that Rick Nash trade that I think a lot of people are still stewing about. I still think that's a trade you make at the time, try to put that team over the top.
Yeah.
You traded Rick Nash with the expectation he was going to be here for a while. Concussions played into it. So it does suck you lose a great kind of defenseman that I think would have been a nice piece to have in Lindgren that the Bruins did draft and develop quite a bit. But also I think you got the Ryan Spooner and Bolesky contracts off the books by doing that trade. So
you did.
That also people kind of forget about that part. That it was also kind of they took some crap contracts as a whole in terms of getting a guy like Rick Nash that ideally should have finally given you a running mate to go with David Krejci on that second line. Didn't work out, but it's a cost of doing business. It's one of those rare times the Bruins have given up a prospect, not like an Axel Anderson, where they've actually become a pretty serviceable defenseman. But that's my honorable mention, Ryan Lindgren.
I agree. That's a good one. And it's funny, I was looking at his elite prospects right during a commercial break, so I was like, I might pick Lindgren with that third pick. Did 2 years at Minnesota, because the Bruins drafted him in 16 out of the program, out of the national program. 2 years at Minnesota, 7 points and 9 points in both those years. Now, obviously, points is not everything, and points is not his strong suit. But I am surprised he only did 2 years at Minnesota. Yeah. You would think a guy like that would do 3 and then go. But he only did 2, went off, and has been a fixture with the Rangers ever since. Not a high point guy, but gets the job freaking done.
You notice him.
You do notice him, and you notice the the hit compilations are pretty legit. But I think that's it. I mean, Johnny Beecher could have got a mention. Jakub Lauko was a nice piece, 3rd round in 2018. Vakanainen, you traded and got Hampus Lindholm. So, like, there is that end of it, too.
He's had a nice little run with Anaheim, which I'm glad to see because he had concussion issues, and it seems like he's got a pretty steady role there, which is good to see.
Yeah. So, again, I think, like, good picks. Not bad. So that's this episode of Poke the Bear. Conor is still honeymooning, having a great time. He is swinging from the vines.
I'm still at home. What are you talking about?
Well, in the future, when people listen to this, you will be happily on your honeymoon. So go enjoy that. And that's been this episode of Poke the Bear. I'm Evan Marinofsky. That's Conor Ryan, represented by Prize Picks and Game Time. You Poke the Bear listeners have a great rest of your week.